All right, welcome everybody to this Vaadin Spring Integration webinar, another webinar in the Vaadin webinar series. My name is Peter Lehto and my colleague here is Henri Sara. And today we're gonna talk about the currently in beta stage being a Vaadin Spring integration add-on that provides the official Spring support for the Vaadin web framework. And well, maybe we could start off with a bit of a history. So Spring has of course been very much used technology in the web application environment, as is Vaadin. Both are very, you could say, mature technologies already. And there's always been a need to combine these two. And ever since the Vaadin directory was released on the Vaadin website, we could almost say that ever since the community has been pushing different kind of Spring integration add-ons forward.
There are several add-ons in the directory.
Yeah, coming from the community really. So showing that the community really wants to have this kind of an add-on. And then the architect working at the Vaadin Ltd, Petter Holmström, has taken on these add-ons and actually has created his own Vaadin for Spring. Not official, but nowadays more and more official integration add-on for Vaadin,
yes.
Which also now the Vaadin Spring integration is based on. So the current Vaadin for Spring that is created by Petter will be utilizing Vaadin Spring once the Vaadin Spring is officially released.
Yes, effectively Vaadin Spring took the core parts of Vaadin for Spring and developed them a bit further.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, let's get to the actual business, what we're going to talk about today. Of course, as you're watching Vaadin webinar, we sort of expect that you already know quite a bit about Vaadin. But just in case you're new to the Vaadin technology, we will give you a really brief intro about that. And since you're also now listening a Vaadin Spring webinar, we also take the liberty to expect that you know quite a bit about Spring, of course. But just in case there are new users in there, we're gonna do a little intro on Spring and Spring Boot and how to integrate these with the actual Vaadin. How we're gonna do this is that we will introduce the official Vaadin Spring integration add-on, currently in beta 3, and we'll have a short demo on how you can create applications with that using Spring Boot to start up the actual application development process. We also received quite some many questions to the pre-registration form as well as to the official Vaadin Tori forum. So we'll try to cover as many questions as possible at the end. And actually you can even now post questions to Tori and we'll just try to cherry pick the most accurate ones of them. Or at least the ones that we're able to answer. All right. So about Vaadin intro. I could say that in our every presentation we always have a joke about the reindeer. So why make an exception here? Vaadin is of course the web framework, but also the Finnish word meaning reindeer. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure quite many people already knew about that. Alrighty. Of course, the logo of the Vaadin also resembles the horns of the reindeer that you can see here on the right. So if you just tilt it 90 degrees. But more to the point, Vaadin is server-driven UI framework. And what Vaadin tries to provide for you are the two core value propositions, two key business values, which are the developer productivity as well as the rich user and developer experience. How Vaadin provides the developer productivity is by very high abstraction level API, component-based API, so users and developers who are familiar with component-based user interface development feel right at home with Vaadin. And of course the rich user experience come from very rich and wide component library distributed Vaadin, and then enhanced by the Vaadin directory that currently provides more than 400 add-on components coming from the Vaadin Ltd, but also from the community using Vaadin. So that's a very big part of Vaadin today. All right, the actual beef of the day is of course Spring. And as we said, there are, of course, people who might be still new to Spring and new to Vaadin. So why not just do a little covering of Spring as well? What do you, Henri, think? What are the, how could you say, most important parts of the Spring for Vaadin developer?
Spring is a framework that consists of many parts, but if we first look at the core Spring, which is maybe of most interest immediately, what it provides is dependency.
Spring Beans.
So, yes. Yeah. And as well, some general cross-cutting concerns are handled, like transaction management can be done with Spring. Spring has its own page-based framework, Spring MVC, for developing web applications or for developing REST services, which is outside the very core, but still one of the main components.
Yeah.
It has support for data access, support for messaging, event passing, and so on.
Yeah. So we could say that Spring is really a modular framework that allows you to mix and match the dependencies that you'll be needing. And well, from our point of view, the things that we're gonna show you a little bit about today are, for example, the Spring Data as well as the Spring Boot. Spring Data is actually a very nice addition for the Spring framework that, let's say, at least from our point of view, provide you very easy way on creating all kinds of repositories and mechanisms on finding entities from different kind of either SQL or NoSQL data sources. Yes. And just, for example, by defining interfaces, you can already get working code, working applications without really having to even implement these, which Spring Data will take care.
So Spring Data abstracts away a lot of the database specificities, for instance.
Yeah. You could say that it does the same for database connectivity, what Vaadin does for the web applications, in a sense. Another pretty big thing is Spring Social. A few months ago, we had a webinar with Josh Long from Pivotal, where we demonstrated Vaadin together with Spring Social. I believe that webinar is still available from the Pivotal webinar site, as well as from various places in YouTube. So as we mentioned, we're going to also be showing the Spring Boot for you today, how to bootstrap your Vaadin application development with Boot, and of course, much more. So this is targeted to be approximately maybe half an hour webinar, so we're not going to be able to show you all the things that you would like, but anyway, these are the very big and, let's say, trendy parts of Spring today. What about the Spring Boot then? Pivotal and well, Spring Framework have released Spring Initializer concept that is practically, let's say, a web environment that allows you to construct your project meta information, define the dependencies on level of Spring modules that you'll be needing in your project, and afterwards allows you to download the project setup package in form of, for example, a Maven project that you can then just import into your Eclipse. So this is what we're going to be using today. And one thing that we're of course very proud of is that Vaadin has been qualified for the project dependencies list in the Spring Initializer. So nowadays, with the official Vaadin Spring integration, it will be part of the POM XML of your Maven project if you initialize the project through the Spring Initializer website.
So big thanks to Stefan also on at Pivotal for that.
Yeah, great job. So let's say for those who don't know Spring Boot, who haven't been using that so much, I would say that at least from my own perspective, when I started using Spring Boot, it was such that it allowed me to have sort of a funnel to the world of Spring, in a sense of having just those dependencies that I need, taking care of the auto configuration of the things, so you don't really have to have tons and tons of XML, but instead just a couple clever annotations will project.
In the past, you had to bring in all kinds of dependencies separately. Yeah. You had to add quite a lot of configuration to get started with Spring.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
With Boot, we get rid of a lot of that.
Yeah. So you could say that Spring Boot gives you sort of a single point of focus. You can just start your application development. You can for example, from the list of non-functional requirements, define what kind of dependencies you need on very high level, what kind of database, NoSQL, SQL database, whatever it is that you need. Also, it's a tool for getting started very quickly. But then again, Spring Boot is just not about getting started. It will, of course, help you all the way during the application development.
It's designed to be used in large production applications all the way.
Yeah, exactly. And also, of course, through the Maven POM structure, it's very easily customizable. And for example, as you saw in the initializer page, you can just click on the dependencies that you want for your application. So the Maven POM hierarchy, of course, and as we mentioned, the annotation-based configuration. So at least in our examples, or even much more non-trivial applications than just examples, the annotation-based configuration is something that allows you to have, of course, a little bit hard-coded annotation-based configuration, but then again, in places where you don't really have to change the configuration, then it really makes sense on using these instead of just the XML. And Spring Boot also allows you to have an embedded web server, so you can package your Spring application as HR, as you maybe saw in the initializer. We can show that to you again as well. And if you just package it into HR, you can run it as a regular Java application that will then internally, through the selected dependencies, for example, kickstart a Jetty or Tomcat server and just run the actual web application there. But from your point of view, you can just start a regular Java application. Okay. So how do you then use this whole concept with Vaadin? Nowadays it's pretty simple. So from the Spring initializer, if you just check the Vaadin checkbox, it will a little bit customize the POM XML for you and add one extra dependency, which is the Vaadin Spring Boot starter. So this is now the official Vaadin Spring Boot add-on for the Vaadin Spring integration.
This dependency actually is just a small POM that brings in other dependencies that makes sure everything is configured.
Yeah, sort of a bill of materials. Yeah, exactly. So what does it then give you? If you start using Vaadin with Spring, what is the, let's say, the most needed use case? At least if you look at the add-ons which were released in Vaadin directory by the community before, they all address the same thing, which is to make Vaadin UIs and Vaadin views Spring managed beans.
Which means that you can inject other things into them.
Yeah, exactly. So just being able to have the UIs and views as a beans is the actual starting point. That is the most critical part in able to be use Vaadin with the Spring. And to do this, Vaadin Spring integration defines two annotations. Another one is Spring UI, another one is Spring View correspondingly. And just by annotating your UI and view with these annotations, Spring Beans will find, of course, through the Vaadin integration, these classes as available beans, which can then be used as the UIs and views correspondingly.
So this helps in that you don't need to, it's much easier to get started. You don't need to configure your UIs, for instance, in web.xml or servlet annotations.
Yeah, you don't need any kind of deployment descriptors. You can just have your UI annotated with Spring UI annotation, and it will appear as bean for the Spring context.
Yes.
Of course, another important thing related to beans is how they are managed, in which kind of scopes and contexts they reside eventually. For this, one of the key parts that is needed with Vaadin is a scope that is bound to the currently active UI. So let's say that normally in a Vaadin application, per one user session, you can have multiple different UI instances per, for example, one browser tab. And when you're doing injections, auto-wirings with different kind of dependencies, it's very important that these dependencies then target the correct UI instances.
Yes.
So the UI scope is the scope definition, the scope context that is then active per one UI instance. Also, of course, we can have a view scope, which then practically means that inside one Vaadin UI you can have multiple different views into which you can navigate into, and these views can also define their own scoping mechanism. And also then finally the Vaadin session scope, which is not exactly the same as HTTP session scope, since you can have several Vaadin sessions inside your HTTP sessions. For example, in the case where you have multiple Vaadin deployments in, let's say, one container that you're sharing with the same HTTP session.
And another situation where these scopes come in handy, including session scope, is when you are doing things from a background thread. So if you are doing something in the background, for instance, then pushing the results to a Vaadin UI, you can use Vaadin session scope also for these tasks.
Yeah, that's a good point. And of course, for doing that in a thread-safe manner, the Vaadin UI provides you ways on accessing and running runnables coming from the background threads, so without messing up the actual communication. Other things, of course, very interesting that the Vaadin Spring integration provides is the access control. This isn't directly to do with Spring security. We will talk a bit more about that just in a second. But what access control means in case of Vaadin Spring integration is that there are two interfaces. Another one is called View Access Control, another one is View Instance Access Control. The difference between these is that the first one use bean definitions to define whether the current user can access the given view or not.
So effectively you can deny access already before the view is created.
Yes, whereas the View Instance Access Control uses the already instantiated view object, view bean, to determine if the user can access this or not.
Yes.
And how you use these is, of course, pretty traditional way in Spring. So you implement these interfaces or interface in your class and define that as a bean.
Yes, and automatically it's used when navigating to a view, to a Spring view. The access controls are checked whether the access is okay.
Yeah.
These are mostly meant as a lower level interface for things like supporting Spring security on top of them, but you can also use them directly in your application.
Yeah. Yeah, so in a case you need to do something quickly and just define this particular view is only available for a certain role, for example, you can do it very easily with this. Or if you're building, let's say, some larger framework kind of an application that uses Vaadin, then you might use these on the lower level to integrate, for example, with Spring Security.
Yes.
All right. Another thing which actually we also got some questions beforehand about is whether the Vaadin Spring integration will work with the Spring MVC, and this is now what is it the latest beta 3
The latest
version
beta
supports
version supports this.
Yeah.
So what you can do is just map both your Vaadin application at the root of the context and use standard Spring MVC, Spring Actuator, whatever REST services map to specific URLs.
Yeah.
And internally, the Vaadin Spring Boot integration will map the Vaadin server elsewhere forward requests as necessary to make it seamless. So your Spring UIs show up where you map them with the path attribute, and Spring MVC shows up where you've mapped that.
So they should all live in the same namespace happily without interfering with each other. This at least is a new feature in the Vaadin Spring that I believe wasn't addressed in the
it wasn't
Vaadin
in
Spring
the original
integration add-on. So anyway, now it is there since the version beta 3. And of course, as Henri said, this is now automatic with the Spring Boot integration. All right. Also, the Vaadin Spring Boot add-on performs all the boot style auto configurations. So it defines you the proper servlets, the proper UI providers, all the mechanisms that are needed for accessing the Vaadin UIs as beans.
So you can use Vaadin Spring without Spring Boot, you get the basic support, you get the scopes, you get the injection and so on. But if you use Vaadin Spring Boot, you get all these servlets, for instance, already automatically configured.
Yeah, exactly. And also then you have the application properties or application YAML file in which you can define the actual properties of your application if you, for example, want to customize some of the Vaadin servlet parameters.
So let's say you want to customize the heartbeat interval, you just add a parameter to your configuration file,
exactly.
properties file.
Yes. And that actually is the Vaadin servlet configuration properties. So you can check out that class if you want to know which kind of parameters you can configure in your properties file. Alrighty. I suppose it's time for a little demo. So we sort of promised you making a little application that should display how Vaadin works with the Spring integration. As we've already said a couple of times, the development of new project, usually always, at least if you're using Spring Boot, begins from the Spring initializer that you can find from the Start Spring.io website. And right in here, you just define the basic properties of your project, all the group IDs, artifact IDs, which type of a project this is. So we're going to be using Maven project in this case. Also the packaging, which is now in our case, just jar. So it's just a regular Java application that will use the embedded web server. You could, of course, also package your application into a WAR file that then allows you to run it as deployable application in a web server. You can define which version of Java you want to use, which version of Spring Boot, of course, and then all the project dependencies. So in case of our demo today, we're going to be using the Vaadin, of course, that's a natural thing. REST repositories, just to demonstrate you how the REST type of the Spring MVC works with Vaadin now that the support is there without mixing the names in beta 3. And we're going to be storing our data with Spring data to local MongoDB database. So after all these properties have been selected, you just click on the Generate Project button, which will then eventually give you the Spring demo zip package, which of course takes the name from the artifact name. What you do is that you extract that zip and afterwards import new existing Maven project into your environment, into your development environment. After which you are given the Spring demo application that initially contains just a standard Java public static void main method in a class that is annotated with Spring Boot annotation called Spring Boot application.
Yes. So this starts out the embedded web server.
Yes, exactly. And if you, for example, have a look at the POM XML file, which actually might be just a little too small for you. Anyway, from here you can see that it contains all the mentioned dependencies, which are the MongoDB Spring Data Integration, Spring Boot starter data for the REST, and the Vaadin Spring Boot starter just to support the Vaadin integrations. So what we're going to be doing is that we create a little application that stores customer entities into a MongoDB, after which we will show you how you can access these entries from the Spring repository with a RESTful service, after which we also make a little Vaadin UI as a Vaadin Spring UI and make a service that will then actually display these records on a Vaadin grid component.
Yes.
So let's see how we can get started. The initial starting point for us is the very, very trivial data model of the application, which is now the customer entity. And it has practically three properties: ID, first name and last name, and the ID is now annotated with the Spring Data's ID annotation. That just tells that the ID is something that will hold the identity information of the actual customer entity. There are two very trivial constructors, all the getters and setters, and toString method that will just properties of the actual entity. So how we're going to be using this is that we first make an interface which is a customer repository, and we extend that from the Mongo repository, and we'll tell the guy that you should use customer type with the string as the ID type. And this is just a very simple interface without any methods directly, but of course inheriting list of methods from the Mongo repository super interface. What we can then do with this is that we say customer repository right here, and just say that we want to auto-wire the actual customer repository right here. And how do we then import some initial test data is that we make something called command line runner and call him, for example, initialize data. And what the command line runner is that it's something that gets invoked once the application starts with the arguments that are passed in for the actual application. So how we do this is that we say new command line runner, and we make an anonymous inner class that has a run method coming from the command line runner interface, which will simply then initialize our data. And using the Java 8, we can make this quite much nicer in a way that we just tell him, okay, we want to use the function directly, which is more or less just a way of saying that we don't want to write that much of code. So we just pass in the string array that we're getting from the main method into our command line runner. And we can actually even still make this bit cleaner. So just remove even the string type and just tell that it's the arguments that we'll be passing into our actual data. But well, we won't be using, of course, these arguments, but they're just something that come from the command line runner interface from the run method. So then let's just say that we want to use our repository, and we say that we want to save a new customer. We can call him, for example, now Peter Lehto.
The comma missing.
Yes, exactly. Good point. And of course, we want to add you here as well. After which we can just say that we want to find all the items from the repository, and let's just say that we want to print all the items in the repository.
So the magic that happened in the background, for those not familiar with Spring data, is that when we define the interface for the repository, Spring creates a class, an implementation, when you inject it.
Yeah, exactly. So only thing for us to do here is to define the interface the way we want it. All right, so let's run the application and see what happens. We of course hope very much that it works. So what goes on is that nothing happens, and this is of course because we didn't define that our command line runner should be a B. This is pretty classic mistake. So of course, as it's discoverable during the initialization time of the application, only then it's able to run it. So let's see if we're luckier this time. All right, and now we actually get all the records twice, since we already started the application twice.
Yes. So what we might want to do is clear the database first.
Yeah. So we can say that delete all. All right, well, that's very, very trivial basic stuff. So let's try something a bit nicer. We can, for example, say that we want to get a customer record from the repository and say find one by first name, and just say that the argument is first name, like this. Without defining anything else, Spring Data is now able to make proper implementation for this method that works with the Mongo repository.
Yes.
And this, of course, it does by the naming conventions. So it knows that we're trying to look for a customer with the first name property. So if we just say that repository find one by first name and say Peter, and just say that we want to print out the guy. And now that we removed the entities from the repository, we should see Peter Lehto, Henri Sara, and Peter Lehto then once again. So let's see how it goes. Yeah, so here they are, all three of them, or actually two, but one guy is just twice. All right, so this is how easy it is with the Spring Data to just set up the initials. All right, well, of course, we want to show you also something from Vaadin, so why not make a new class? Let's call him a customer UI, and extend, of course, from the abstract Vaadin UI. And as we sort of promised for you, it should be enough just to say that this is a Spring UI, and we can say set content to be, for example, new label, hello from Vaadin, like that, and just import the Vaadin UI label right here. Starting this application now and using the latest beta 3, this should now automatically map into the context root of the current port in which the embedded web server is started.
Yes. You could give a parameter to Spring UI to use a different context, but...
Yes, of course. And right here we have hello from Vaadin coming from the application. Maybe we want to do something a bit more not so trivial. So as we said, the Spring UI annotation defines UIs as Spring Beans. What we might also want to do is that we define our views as Spring Beans. So what we can do is that we use Vaadin Navigator and combine that with a special Spring View provider that is able to access the existing view beans as Vaadin views in such a way that it can navigate into them once somebody wants to do the actual navigation. So we can say that we just instantiate the regular Vaadin Navigator, and what we do is that we go here and do a little trick so that I don't have to write so much code. The trick is such that we have a Vaadin vertical layout, menu bar, and a panel stacked inside one another in such a way that the layout is the actual composition root of our UI. We have the menu bar at the top, and then just the panel which hosts our views inside the same layouting system. We add all the components into the vertical layout. We tell them that we want the actual view area to take the full available size, and just if there's any extra space left, we will just expand the view content in there.
And what we are missing is still creating the navigator instance and setting it.
Yes. So we will make a new navigator, and for the navigator we just say that it should navigate inside this particular UI using the view content as the actual view area. So this is pretty basic stuff for all the existing Vaadin developers. But what you get now from the Spring integration is that we have Spring View Provider, and we can just auto-wire the Spring View Provider into our application, and we can say that navigator add provider being the actual view provider. All right, we have our menu bar right here. So what we could do is that we say menu add item, and well, we could call him, for example, dashboard, and just throw in a little lambda on dashboard clicked. And what we might want to do is to make a method that simply navigates with our navigator into the actual dashboard view. So we say navigator navigate to dashboard, like this. After which we of course need the dashboard view, which I have prepared for us right here. So it's just a simple Vaadin view class extended from the vertical layout in this case, implementing the navigator view interface, and having the Spring View annotation that now defines the view as a being.
Right now you seem to have a different name here than for the in the menu.
Yes, that's true. So let's just call him dashboard as well. That's a good catch. So what we then of course want to do is that once we navigate into our app, we say that by default we navigate into dashboard as this is now our default view. All right, so if everything is okay, we should now have one button in the navigator or in the top menu bar with the dashboard. We can also add a new one called customers, and this one would be the on customers clicked, which will then give us a new method. And in there we just tell him that we want to navigate into customers view. So our dashboard view was very simple. It had just one label that says dashboard. So we can copy this guy and say that this is customer view. And this is now, was it customers or customers?
Customers.
Yes, and this is called customers. So what we've done so far is that we added two beans, customer view and dashboard view, all with the very basic Vaadin viewing mechanism, and just added the proper Spring View annotations right here. So now starting the app should give us navigation for these two views that are then resolved from the Spring Beans. All right, so let's see. So right there we have our menu bar, dashboard and customers, and just clicking these two will change the URI fragment as well as the actual view. And just to make, of course, this look a bit nicer would be that we say we want to have Valo theme enabled in our server. So let's just restart him once more to get the changes. And just have it a bit nicer looking. Okay, so then how about showing our data in our customers' views? That we can do. What's pretty common is that there's some kind of a service class that provides us some kind of service for accessing data from the backend system. Of course, that is now a bit artificial since we're in the same environment here, but just for the practice, we could say that we want to make a class called customer service. And this customer service is now something that we call Spring Service, which will hold the customer repository. And we will just auto-wire the repository right here. And we could say that we want to get a list of customers. And what he should do is that just from the repository, we find all available customers. Very trivial stuff.
Import missing.
Although not so trivial apparently. Great, so now having the service here, we could go into our customer view and just say here that we have a customer service. And we want to auto-wire the service right here. Instead of label, we want to use, for example, the Vaadin grid, which was just released in 7.4. Yes, exactly. So let's make a new grid and just say that grid should take all the available space that we have, as well as also our actual view. After which we can tell the grid that he should have two columns. So let's say add column, and this is now first name, and the type should be string. And let's also add a second column, which is the last name.
If you leave out those, you get all the columns based on the what are in the container.
Yes.
So you would
all the properties from the customer entity in that case. So this is something that happens in the post construct method. That means that after all the injections have been done, the post construct will be invoked by the bean management system and will execute the content of the method. Another method that we have in our view is coming from the view interface, the enter method, which is invoked once the actual navigation happens into our customer view. So we want to populate the grid with proper data from the service only in the case when somebody really navigates into the view, just to, for example, make the loading of the application a bit faster.
So for instance, if navigation would be denied by an access control implementation, we would not call the enter method.
Yeah, exactly. So how we would do this is that let's, for example, change the grid into just a field. And inside the enter method, we then say that grid set container data source. And we can, for example, use bean item container. And the bean type in this case would be the customer. And the type would, of course, be the customer class. And the second parameter for the bean item container in this case would be just the service of ours with the get customers method that we implemented into our service. So with this, I suppose we should be able to list our customers. Let's have a look. All right, application started. We have again 2 customers in the app. And if we go into the customers view, we see nothing because we didn't add the grid. Exactly, little demo effect, of course. So we want to add grid here as well. Stupid mistake.
What happens?
All right, let's just try it again. And now we have customers view with the 2 records coming from the actual data. And since, of course, we also check that we want to use the REST repositories, we should now be able to just say that customers defined the REST endpoint that is now provided by the customers repository, since we have the REST repositories dependency in our project.
So that's effectively a boot module that by default exposes the database, the repositories as REST endpoints.
Yeah. Of course, if you don't want to enable this for all your repositories, you can use a special annotation in the repository class just to define that this one should not be exposed.
Yes.
But this is the default behavior, it's the dependencies there.
And you could, for instance, secure this with Spring Security.
Yeah, exactly. We can also do searches right here. So if you just say search, there is one method available for searching, which now knows that it's find one by the first name. Of course, at this point, that wouldn't exactly yet work because we don't have any parameter defined within our repository. So you could just say that here we have a param coming from the Spring data, not from the data, but actually from the, from the repositories anyhow. And here the value for the parameter would be, in that case, just the first name. For example, just to tell it that once we do the actual query from the URL, it should map the given first name parameter as the string of the first name right here. So doing this should give us only one record from the customer's view.
As long as we add the first name, it was first name and not name.
Yes. And there he is. Data is available. Again, this is now something that is supported by the beta 3 release. So without that, you would have had to do some kind of configuration on mapping the Vaadin and also these MVC endpoints into the same URL namespace.
Yes.
All right. I suppose this is enough for our demo today. Let's not go to the R, but just go right here. Great. Yes. Then some things about how you can get started with this development. We practically already showed you everything that it takes, but just to repeat, you can find the Spring initializer from the start.spring.io website, which allows you now to check Vaadin as a dependency to use Vaadin UIs as the beans. If you're an Eclipse developer, you can of course download the Eclipse plugin from the Eclipse marketplace for Vaadin development, just to kickstart Vaadin development if you're not, for example, using Maven. Then we also provide different kind of archetypes for Vaadin development, so you can just build a Maven project out of this kind of an archetype.
There isn't a Spring-specific archetype, but it's a matter of just adding a few dependencies, one or a few dependencies, and then what you could add is a import of the Vaadin POM to configure which Vaadin version you want to use with it.
Yeah. So that will keep all the versions sorted.
Yes.
All right, but we probably are going to have a Spring archetype at some point.
There will be an example archetype.
Yeah. Of course, the book of Vaadin is something that you can refer to in the case of any Vaadin questions. So what did we learn today, if anything, hopefully, is that Vaadin, of course, is very handy for business applications because you can, with very little code, make component-based UIs that are pretty easy to develop in a business application environment, you would say. And of course, Spring Boot will kickstart your development very easily, but in addition of just kickstarting the development, it will help you all the way with the dependency management and whatnot.
And if there is something in the boot, in what boot brings in that you don't like, you can usually just quickly disable that feature and continue with reaping the benefits of boot.
Yeah. And the official Vaadin Spring integration is now in beta 3 version. I'm probably not going to say anything about the official schedule, maybe you know more?
Yes, it was planned to be released already in April, but there are only some very minor fixes and then some features about which we are considering whether we postpone them to 1.1 so that we could get 1.0 out very soon.
Yeah, exactly. And all of those who are already using the Vaadin for Spring add-on from the directory, that will then be based on the Vaadin Spring integration. Yes. So all the things which are not going to be part of the official integration, all kinds of add-ons will be then in the Vaadin for Spring integration.
So this also concerns Vaadin for Spring has a number of extensions, such as one for Spring Security. So right now, Spring Security support is not part of the official add-on, but Vaadin for Spring building on top of it is bringing that in. So as Sean and Paul and many others have asked, actually, once we get out the final version of Vaadin Spring, Vaadin for Spring will be migrated on top of that.
Yeah. So without making any promises, it's maybe a matter of not even months, but maybe even weeks.
I hope it is within weeks.
Yeah, without making any promises. All right. So we also got quite a big bunch of different kind of questions. Maybe we'll try to cover a couple ones of them.
So quite a few of the questions already concern Spring Security. So as mentioned, there is quite a lot of support in Vaadin for Spring for that. The unofficial add-on from Petter, which has a lot of contributions from outside as well. With that, you will be able to use the standard applications, for instance. But that will be available soon after the official release of Vaadin Spring.
Yeah.
Then we had Jorge asking about the Spring versions supported by Vaadin Spring. Currently, the officially supported Spring version is Spring 4. So that's what we are testing it with as well. The boot integration, Vaadin Spring Boot, does depend on some things that are new, as far as I can recall, to Spring 4.
Yeah.
But the basic support might work also with older Spring versions, although we are not testing it with those.
So Spring 4 at least is required. And with Boot, the, let's say, latest versions of Boot.
Ideally the latest version.
Yeah.
What we also had question on, well, we already touched Daniel's question about setting up a Vaadin application with Spring and Maven. So mostly just a question of adding the dependencies.
Yeah, using the initializer.
Yes. And then we had Make and Kim asking about portlet support.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
So at the moment in Vaadin Spring 1.0, there's no built-in portlet support.
Yeah.
The boot add-on does have a number of servlet dependencies as it's doing auto-configuration of servlets.
Yeah.
But the Vaadin Spring core add-on doesn't have much. So it should be an easy task to to add at least portlet support to that.
Yeah. That could even be something that Vaadin for Spring will cover at some point.
That could come in version 1.1 or at some later point.
Yeah. So currently, if you want to hack it together, it's going to be easier just with the Vaadin Spring without boot. We could say that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Other than that, we already touched on how to make Vaadin Spring and the Spring MVC coexist.
Yeah.
And I believe that's about it. That's about what we have time for now.
All right. So I suppose there are no more questions then, and no questions in the forum either. So that practically means that we're done.
Yes.
I suppose. So we hope that you find this Vaadin Spring integration very useful, and at least from our point of view, the community has been asking for this for a very long time, and now we can say that it's finally almost there.
Yes.
So just a couple more fixes into the beta versions and we're out with 1.0 stable. Oh, right.
Feel free to start using already the beta, and
Yeah.
if there is an issue, just
Post
take
it
it
forwards. Yes, exactly. So thank you everybody very much for participating, and we'll be back with our webinar series.